Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. Today, I'd like to talk about how do you get people who are optimistic and pessimistic to collaborate together effectively in the workplace. And most of us are one type or the other, optimistic or pessimistic. Now, I am pretty optimistic. That means I see the world as mostly a friendly place, a hopeful place. The future is bright, the glass is half empty, the grass is green on the other side of the hill. By contrast, my wife is a pessimist. She sees the world as mostly full of threats, mostly full of risks. She is risk averse, whereas I tend to be risk blind. She sees the glass as half empty, and she sees the future as mostly dark, and she sees the grass as yellow on the other side of the hill. Those types of personalities, again, most people are one or the other. They very rarely are balanced, realistic, result from two dangerous judgment errors, cognitive biases. Now, if you've been checking out, listening to the Wise Decision Maker Show for a while, you know that's what we talk about, these dangerous judgment errors that come from how our brain is wired. So neuroscience shows that we have a lot of dangerous judgment errors. I talk about them extensively in my books, like Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters, The Blind Spots Between Us, How to Overcome Unconscious Cognitive Bias and Build Better Relationships, and other books. So those are two books that you can check out. I talk about cognitive biases. And two very common ones, cognitive biases that are diametric opposites of each other. This one is the optimism bias. So the optimism bias has to do with us perceiving having too positive a view of future risks and rewards. So that's what it's basically about. We see the future as mostly a positive place, and we see the current world as mostly a positive place. And so we tend to be risk blind. We tend to think that the rewards are bigger than they are, and we tend to think that the risks are smaller than they are. And that's, again, I'm saying we because I am an optimist. Most business leaders are actually optimists, most entrepreneurs. I started Disaster Avoidance Experts, which is a boutique consulting, coaching, and training firm in risk management and decision-making strategy. And I started it in part because I'm an optimist, because I saw the future as mostly a friendly place. Even though about half of all startups fail within the first 5 years and 3/4 fail within the first 15 years. I know the statistics on that. So despite that, I decided to start it and hope for that the business will not be one of those that fails within the first 5 years, and the 50% or the 75% that fail within the first 15 years. So let's hopefully not. But entrepreneurs tend to be pretty optimistic, and business leaders, those are the top of the business, tend to be pretty optimistic. So the startup founder, CEO, I'm pretty optimistic. The pessimism bias is the opposite cognitive bias. It's the opposite of the optimism bias. You tend to see the future as more risky than it actually is and less full of rewards. You tend to see the rewards as smaller, and you tend to see the risks as larger, and of course in the present too. So you'll find a lot of people who are pessimistic in the number 2 role in an organization. So my wife, who's a pessimist, is the chief operating officer of Disaster Avoidance Experts, for example. So that role helps hold down the leader's feet to the ground. I'm more of a strategy, big picture, and she's kind of the more implementer, doer, kind of helping address some of the too grand designs that I have about the business, and lots of great ideas that may unfortunately go nowhere. So optimists and pessimists, that's commonly the difference between them. Optimists tend to generate new ideas. I'm great at generating new ideas. I have 20 ideas before breakfast, and I think they're all brilliant. I learned to my bitter experience that they're not all brilliant, but most optimists who are not aware of these dangerous cognitive biases that they suffer from the optimism bias, they feel that their ideas are brilliant, and therefore they think that they're brilliant, and therefore they claim that these ideas are brilliant, and they push these ideas hard. That's what happens to optimists most often. Pessimists, by contrast, are critical of these new ideas because they perceive these new ideas as risky, sometimes more risky than they actually are. So pessimists are not great at generating new ideas, but they're great at finding the risks in these ideas. So they feel threatened, they feel anxious about these ideas coming from optimists. And that is the source of a lot of conflict. Whereas optimists, they think that pessimists are just naysayers who never allow good ideas to go forward. They shoot down the brilliant ideas, brilliant in quotation marks, of optimists. And that's definitely a challenge for optimists like myself to feel that their brilliant ideas are being shut down by people like my wife and business partner, or of course in any sort of collaborative project. Pessimists, by contrast, they think that optimists are going off half-cocked, always coming up with half-baked ideas. And that is a big, big challenge where pessimists constantly feel like they have to be critical. They have to be Mrs. No or Mr. No. So they have to be kind of holding down everyone's feet to the ground and saying, okay, are we sure we want to go there? Figuring out all the risks, all the problems. That's the role that pessimists generally take on. Unfortunately, they don't work together. They just fight each other. That's not a good recipe for success. You have a lot of team conflict, a lot of struggles at the leadership level between number one, number two, and other members in the C-suite, between team members, some of whom are optimistic, some of whom are pessimistic. That is not a good mode for collaboration. Instead, what you need to do is learn each other's strengths. What are your strengths? Are you an optimist or are you a pessimist? Generally speaking, optimism and pessimism are seen as weaknesses, but really what they are is different strengths when you use them correctly. You want to use the strengths of each personality to be stronger together. So optimists, for example, as I mentioned, are great at generating ideas. That's their strength. Like I said, 20 ideas before breakfast, I think they're all brilliant. Pessimists, by contrast, are great at optimizing ideas. Right now, that's not the case in most situations where they're not optimizing, they're shooting down the ideas. And optimists are defending their ideas. And that is not a great dynamic. A much better dynamic is for pessimists to serve as devil's advocates, to improve ideas rather than shoot them down. So what you want to do is mix up the process of collaboration. You want to create balanced teams where you hire and promote people who are different than you. Because what you'll have then is a balance of optimists and pessimists where how they should work together is if you're an optimist, you have 20 brilliant ideas before breakfast, right? You think they're all brilliant. Then you need to give up ownership of these ideas. You can't keep ownership of them. It's something I learned based on the research on this topic, that you really can't keep ownership of them. You gotta give them to the pessimists and say, hey, here are 20 half-baked ideas, and you gotta frame them as half-baked ideas. You can't say these are brilliant ideas because the pessimist will generally see so many holes in your ideas and you will not see those holes because you are an optimist. So you gotta frame that as half-baked ideas even if you feel that they're brilliant. Frame them as half-baked ideas, and what the pessimist will do is that makes it safe for the pessimist, that reduces the anxiety and the worry about the ideas being already ready and that they can't take the time to improve them and address all the problems. And of course, giving up ownership addresses the anxiety of the optimist that their brilliant ideas will be shut down because they're no longer their ideas. They're just ideas that they're passing on as notions, as half-baked potatoes to the pessimist. And the pessimist or the pessimist team members, if you're doing this as part of a team rather than a two-person dynamic, the pessimist team members or team member will then look for these 20 ideas and say, well, these 17 just won't do, but these 3, maybe these are half-baked potatoes that are worth finishing baking. And they're not good at all at generating new ideas because they inherently see the flaws of each idea, bigger flaws than they actually are. But they're great at judging ideas, at evaluating ideas, and then implementing them. So that is a great strength of pessimists, judging ideas and implementing them. You don't want them to do the brainstorming. Don't force them to do brainstorming. It will not work well for them. But they're great at the stage of criticizing ideas. You want the optimist generating ideas. You want pessimists to be criticizing ideas. And then you want to have those balanced teams. So a problem I've seen so often is where teams are hired based on you liking other people who have your personality, whether you're an optimist or you're a pessimist. So as an optimist, it's very tempting for me to hire other optimists. I click with them well. We work together, we bounce supposedly brilliant ideas off each other. And think about what would happen if I had a team of optimists, let's say 6 people. So disaster avoidance experts currently employ 6 people. So if all 6 of us were optimists, then we'd have 120 brilliant ideas before breakfast, and we'd be reinforcing each other's ideas, and we'd be running in 120 different directions. That's one of the main reasons that actually startups fail, that you are pursuing too many projects, you're not focusing enough on the most profitable, least risky, most rewarding projects. By contrast, by making sure that I hire some pessimists, I have a team that is actually able to filter the ideas of optimists like myself and focus on the projects that are highest reward for lowest risk. So you gotta have those balanced teams. And the same thing for pessimists. You can't have a team of all pessimists. You will not be generating nearly enough new ideas. You won't be nearly creative enough. Now, in some fields, that may be fine. If you're, for example, in the field of accounting, you may not want to be generating that many new ideas. Just do your accounting. Pessimists are a good area for that. Or if you are if your role is sales. If your role is sales, that should be mostly an area for optimists, because getting turned down for sales is a hard thing, and you need that optimism to carry you forward, and you can create lots of new ideas, and some of them won't stick, and that's okay. But most teams, you gotta have balanced teams, and hiring people who are different than you if you want to succeed, and make sure that you have optimists and pessimists collaborating together effectively. And that's the secret to doing so. Hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Wise Decision Makers Show. Now, as always, click like if you liked it. Please share it with your friends if you know some optimists or some pessimists who can benefit from this show. And make sure to follow us on whatever venue you've heard us. We have both a video and a podcast version, videocast and a podcast version of the show. So they're going to be in the show notes. So check out the video if you've heard the podcast. Check out the podcast if you've heard the video. Make sure to follow us wherever you prefer to get your media. So do that. Check out the blog that's linked in the show notes. It has a lot more information on how optimists and pessimists can collaborate together effectively, including some case studies which will be helpful for explaining what it looks like in a team setting. Also, check out the 2 books I mentioned. Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Wisest Decisions and Avoid Disasters. Wisest Business Decisions and Avoid Disasters. So check out that book. That talks about, of course, how do you make good decisions, how do you manage risks, and plan strategy. The other book that I mentioned is called The Blind Spots Between Us, How to Overcome Unconscious Cognitive Bias and Build Better Relationships. That talks about communication, unconscious bias, relationship building. Those 2 books are all very relevant, both very relevant for optimists and pessimists collaborating together effectively. And for a free resource, check out the free resource course, 8 video-based module course on making the wisest decisions. It's called the Wise Decision Maker course. It's going to be at disasteravoidanceexperts.com/subscribe. Again, disasteravoidanceexperts.com/subscribe for a free 8 video-based module course on making the wisest decisions. And the first module of that course is an assessment on dangerous judgment errors in the workplace, which I think will be really helpful for you to figure out which of the dangerous judgment errors, cognitive biases, there's over 100 of them, you're most vulnerable to. So check that out. And as always, I hope that this episode has been illuminating, enlightening, and profitable for you. And I'm wishing you the wisest and most profitable decisions, my friends.